Well, hello and goodbye from him. Here we are again, talking about Yiquan. Hold on a minute, there's a special guest about to appear, I suspect. So, today, well, we've looked at quite a few things, and today I want to move on and start thinking about something I talked about in the video where I was looking at how we use combining punches and elbows, and I started to talk about, well, something I've been alluding to all along, talking about how you can stack postures in different ways. And here it is, squeaky octopus. Oh well, it is what it is. As per usual, not quite as professional and polished presentation of, it's the ideas that matter. So where was I? I talked about in the video on combining punches. Oh mate, right in the nuts. Punching, always be ready. It's my own fault, of course, always be ready. So, once again, where was I? No mate. Yeah, in the video where I was looking at combining punches with elbows, I started talking about the idea that these are just like template, or like kind of basic postures. They're just templates. That actually there's infinite variations of these, and what we're doing is we're kind of going on a journey to understand something quite abstract about what it means to be an intuitive art, for each one to be an intuitive art. So you could have an art where, like let's say for example, someone I was talking about, whenever I was talking about, because in the elbows video initially I was talking about Ramsey Dewey, who's got like an MMA channel. And I was just watching quite a funny video from it, and I thought it was funny, where he's talking about cross punches, and he always does cross punches on an angle like that. And that's a very fixed way of doing it. So he always does it like that, cross like that. There's various things about how that's different to how we might want to do it in each one. But what's completely different is there's just one way of doing it, that he just does it one way, or I'm sure it doesn't in practice, but the way he explains it is, I always do it like this, I always do it chopping down like this, so I can chop down into the jawline, which is a legitimate idea. Talked about it myself. Whereas in an intuitive system, we don't think like that. We think like we just want to hit with any part of the body with force within the parameters and reality of the context of the fight. So our overall Yiquan paradigm, we want to release force, any part of the body, any angle. And this is what I've talked about as the idea of the configuration. We want to hit with any part of the body, and what Wang Shangjai calls Taolu. You form a configuration that hits with power using quintessence principles of Wushu. So this is another thing, it can't just be anything. It can't just be, if we want to say overall that we're talking about each one, that's got to mean something. And I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean fixed postures, doesn't mean fixed techniques. And that's the absolute clear orthodox teaching of Wang Shangjai. These are the abstract things that we've got to understand and embody as knowledge. So when people are saying things like, I learned the authentic system from such a student of, from such a lineage descending from such a student of Wang Shangjai, it's not necessarily meaningless. If that system allows you to unfold your own intuitive ability, then that's absolutely fine. But if that system just captures you within a set of fixed movements, well, that's not intuitive ability to release force from any part of the body. So from, let's say, Ramsey Dewey's perspective, and he's saying like, well, I do a cross like a hook like this, hooking down like this. That's his configuration for that. But even for him, even for someone teaching like if he's teaching a formal fight-based system, he knows there's got to be variations. I'm saying that, but in the video I was watching, he was saying like, well, like hooks are close range like that. And I've talked before. I've criticised Yao Chen Rong particularly in his students, for having like a hook that's completely flat like that, like that Ramsey Dewey has as well, but he angles it down like that. But his lead hook is like that, and he's saying it's close range. And Ramsey Dewey's saying it's close range, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking like, yeah, well, there's a top tip. You've got an elbow joint, and that can change the length of the posture like that quite easily. And also, close range isn't that much of a problem because people move and shift their distance away from you. So you need to be able to change the length of the posture. Quite interestingly, he starts talking about some ideas around to maintain this kind of fixed posture, which I've talked about before being a problem in both Yiquan and Xing Yiquan, that you want it linked in very close to the shoulder. He starts talking about stepping off line and punching like that to maintain this, because it links much more, it's much stronger and it links much more closely into the shoulder. So he kind of repeats the problem that was recognised in Xing Yiquan by Wang Shanzhai and his students. He repeats that problem, which is really, really interesting. Not going to go on about that. But what do you do? What's happening when you use your elbow joint to make a posture bigger, to respond intuitively to the target and where it is you are changing the way that the configuration is stacked. You're changing the stack. You're starting off with a fairly basic, let's say a hook like that, fairly basic configuration, one of our foundation configurations, because we know that we pretty much going to use this all the time and we can base other things around it. And Ramsey Dewey, if you don't know, he's teaching MMA. His solution for being able to respond to people who being able to use a posture more efficiently in different circumstances is to use footwork. And that's quite interestingly the way a lot of people talk about each one, saying it's close range, and if I want to maintain the way that my arm is it's a little bit like that, because like I'm not like, it's not clear that Ramsey Dewey's argument makes any sense, because he's saying like if you punch in like this, if you punch forward like this, that's wrong with a hook, and he says you're open in different ways, and it's not entirely clear that argument is true. But he talks about things like stepping out so that you're on an angle and then hitting in like that, so that you can maintain this structure where it's very strongly structurally interconnected with the arm. But of course, actually you can just punch like that, just straight like that, but it's very close range if you do that, obviously. And if you start changing, as we've talked about before, it starts changing the way that the force is dissipated in the arm. So the further out it is like that, this is a really strong structure that links really strongly into the arm. It relies on muscular strength a lot, but in each one, there's a different thing going on where we're working on our body consistency so that it interlinks very strongly with a whole integrated system to transmit force. But nevertheless, you can't look down on the physical strength, the muscular strength. We can say muscular strength, or we can say like most importantly in each one, the efficiency of muscle movement that we're training through standing and sheerly and the way that we move. We're improving muscle efficiency, but critically, muscle efficiency in the terms of the way that all muscle groups interlink and then connect to other parts of the body to create a whole system. So it's not just like this kind of posture, and it's not even just in the movement, it's in the consistency of the movement, which is a very different thing to saying just like turn your body into it or something like that. That's not the same thing as the consistency of movement and screwing force, and the way that intent, like it's quite an abstract idea to say that intent is connecting the body together, but I've talked about the idea of saying that like tension is the wrong word, but that tension brings your intent into your body and really helps your E connect to your whole body. A bit like, when you get like a dye put into your body and then the doctors can do an x-ray and see the dye going through your body. If you bring tension into your body, that allows the intent to feel your body. And I've said before, like that, there's lots of problems with certain ways of moving that people think are whole body connectivity because they just bring tension into the body, like in, for example, dynamic tension, white crane movement. And I talked about the idea that that's not the thing that we want in each one, and that tension is the wrong word. So we can say like muscle engagement, the level of muscular engagement in each one, correct body consistency, is such that you really feel everything knit together. And it's not just about feeling, it's about movement itself and the way the body uses this articulated movement. And we also know that that's partly about generating force by making the movement bigger. And the ability to do this on a much more refined level is what we call cultivation. So for us, it's not that much of an issue. Like, we can make the posture longer, and we can compensate for it in different ways, but nevertheless, the posture still puts strain. The longer the arm out is, the more it's a lever, the more strain it's going to put on this shoulder. I mean, one of the things Ramsey Dewey says is like, don't swing a hook like that, because it should be close range, and you shouldn't swing it close range. Like I have to say, Mike Tyson does it very much like that. But you can compensate a little bit for the speed and the power if it's longer by getting a bit of a hook on it, a swing on it. That's why people do that. But for us, we can do it longer, and we can do it hit into the centre line, and we focus more on the transmission of force to the contact point, and using whole body consistency so that we don't have to compensate by getting a big swing on it like that. We can just use the power. We can put the movement of the big swing into the body and transmit the force to the point by body consistency and the way that the posture is stacked. So we're stacking the posture differently like that, which isn't that abstract at the end of the day. Then what happens is, as I talked about, when we start bringing it into moving, we start using the way that we move to add extra volume. So if we think about articulated movement and screwing force as adding more movement into our movement, so it's not just the arm going out like that. The whole body is just generating movement. And that's this very characteristic way of moving that we see in each one. And it's toned down a lot in the later kind of Yao brothers way of moving, because the idea being that the reality of the context of the fight means you don't want too much of this going on. Like, you can generate much more volume by getting these big Gao Chen. You go and watch Gao Chen, and the way that he moves, he really gets these big, creating volume through massive articulations of movement like that. And then the Yao brothers, but they really tone that down, in my view, correctly, because the reality of the context of the fight is that's too slow to get these big articulation moves. So you get it down much more around screwing force and efficiency in terms of Fa Li. And that then starts opening up the door to some really interesting ideas that's really going to expand our minds and also the stuff that we know. And the first thing to say about that is using this. I mean, this is the scientific way, like being in conversation with other people and what they're saying and talking about their theory. This is the way science develops. It's not meant to be specifically critical, but I think it's really, really useful in this case, because it's the same idea that, the idea that Ramsey Dewey is talking about is the same idea that you hear people talking about in each one all the time. The idea of each one as a short range system. And how we can kind of unpack that and see that that's not it. That's not it that we're trying to get at. It's a misunderstanding of the way that the system works. So what Ramsey Dewey talks about is he says, well, I want to maintain this quite short arc in the way that I use a hook like that. Maintain this very strong posture. So what I want to do is to maintain that, and because it's short range, if my opponent's further away, I want to think about things like 1, 2, and doing a step like that. So 1, 2, like that. So you maintain it and you use the step like that. And that's really, really interesting, because so many people in Yiquan talk like that, that you've got to use, Yiquan's close range, and you've got to use footwork to get in. And it's astonishing. I mean, you know, obviously Ramsey Dewey's a professional fighter, and people do that in professional fights, but it's not that common, is it? Like, for a hook to always be very close range like that. But certainly in Yiquan, the people who talk about that, you don't really see them actually doing it in life scenarios, because it's so difficult in reality to make that work all the time, to keep the system as a close range system. And this is something I've talked about before, like in Xing Yiquan, where the ideology just emerges to justify the posture, rather than thinking about what's wrong with the posture and how we modify that. And this is where Wang Shangjai and his senior students started thinking about Xing Yiquan. Like, so in Xing Yiquan, always using footwork to maintain like this very linear posture. In this case, using footwork to maintain close range and keeping very close range. And all that's doing is maintaining this strong configuration where it's close in like that. And that's the idea. You want to maintain the people who talk like this, even if they don't understand it themselves, what they're really doing is they're creating ideology around the somatic feeling itself that they've got in their body. This feels very strong. This doesn't feel strong. The further out it is, the less strong it feels to them. So they don't want to do it like that. And if they ever even get around to hitting a bag like that, it's like, oh, that's too, you know, oh, it hurts my arm. It's so they want to maintain this very close range way of punching, because it maintains this very strong interconnection of the structure. And what that does is it compensates for the fact that your overall use of consistency and configuration is poor. So the closer it is like this, like the further it out it is like that, the more you're going to have to start relying on the overall configuration, the correct amount of muscular engagement to maintain, particularly at the last moment where we tense into the hip point, that the correct configurational structure and consistency of body integration and the way that muscles move and work together, which is far more important than the individual strength of muscles per se. That's important, but in each one what we care about is the way that everything integrates together. That's the thing that we try to get. That's got to be cultivated at a higher level to start hitting out at further distances and maintain our principles, Farley, hitting at the centre line, transmission of force, the way that we stack postures, it's got to be at a higher level. So the people who are talking about each one as a close range system, really that's hiding this. It's an ideology that hides the fact that their overall cultivation is not high enough. They want to maintain it as a close range system because it's easier to generate and control the force that they generate, and the further out it goes, the harder it is to do that. And if you look at the really higher level people, they're not just close range at all. They're all these big movements that are out because they're generating force from more volume. So that's a whole other thing. And within that way of thinking, what they're thinking about is footwork is just about maintaining close range. So that's what we're using, in their mind, that's what we're using footwork for, to maintain this close range way of delivering force, because it's just easier on the body to do that. In most cases, of course, like you never see them sparring anyway, so it's all theory, but even if you just do it on the air, you can feel it just feels stronger. As soon as you get on the bag, you can feel it stronger, keeping the arms in like that, keeping the arms in. As soon as you start getting longer with the postures, the harder it is. But actually, in reality, you need that. It's so difficult to maintain close range all the time. It's so much more difficult in reality to do that a lot of people, when they come to do sparring, it's the same anyway, no matter how you train, I have to say, but particularly so people who train like that and they've been thinking like that, and they come to do sparring and it immediately doesn't work. And then there's this period of time where some people are just like, oh, well, that wasted time, it's all nonsense, it doesn't even work, and they're absolutely shocked, and I've seen it happen, like, just the look on people's faces, like, not just with each one, but with other stuff, like, it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. Actually, if you bear with it, usually in most things, like, you adapt naturally to the realities of the fight, and you think about it, well, why doesn't it work? I need to be doing techniques that are longer. Then it starts to, I've talked about this before, you start to grow into the ability to use it in a more practical way. Most people never get that far because they're just trapped in this kind of ideology of doing it and thinking, well, it's just short range. And very interestingly, this is what Ramsey Dewey does. Like, he thinks about footwork in terms of just to allow him to maintain this kind of very short range hook. You use footwork to get you into a range. But there is a little bit of, he's talking about like, you know, you can use, like, there's just a little bit of, once you've stepped, you can use this extra little bit of body movement to get power into the punch. But overall, so there's no conception there, for example, of using compensatory power, like with the step to actually get the body movement going forwards. And you can see when he starts hitting the bag, it doesn't have this kind of whole body connectivity. Even though he's talking very much in kind of Yiquan terms about some things, it doesn't have this kind of movement around the core axis like that to generate force. So it's all about the arm. And the more it's all about the arm, the more it's all about the strength of this structure, because you've got to get more and more on the arm. And the stronger it feels, the more you want to keep it in this square posture. And the more you start thinking about footwork as just getting you into place. Seems quite abstract, I know. So instead, I mean, here's the difficult thing, because we're talking about the consistency of the body that we're developing through Zhanzhuang and slow movement, and the ability to integrate the musculature and then fine-grained movement, like around the axis, farly around the axis, and then the transmission of force to the contact point, particularly by the way that the posture is rooted and then stacked. We've talked about all that stuff before. But let's say we start thinking about it differently now. We start thinking about it from an Yiquan perspective, and we don't have to speculate. We can just think about the movement that we know, that we see the old masters doing, and that we always think about it, for example, in terms of, you know, this is avoidance this way. So it can be, let's say we're going to do this 1, 2 like that Ramsey Dewey is talking about. It can be positioning yourself relative to the person, and the other thing he just doesn't seem to take into account of is that, I mean, he must know, but people move. He's been in a fight, he knows that people move, so he says, like, you know, don't do combinations where it's like jab, hook, uppercut, because jabs are longer range and hooks are shorter range and uppercuts are shorter range. It's like, yeah, but people move. You miss with the jab, they move in. So you actually do need combinations where the punches are different, obviously, because people move and they move quite fast. And you need to be able to do that. So he's saying step to the side, which, you know, if this is going to be your general principle, which is what he said, like, this is the general principle. What I'm trying to do here is say, like, you know, Yiquan theory isn't dumb, you know. Chinese wushu isn't stupid. So we step out to the side like that, and the idea is you're just stepping past the person. For some reason, this is going to be your general principle of how you throw a hook, because you always, you know, what's been said, what Ramsey Dewey is saying is, this is how you get to the side to throw a hook. You shouldn't throw it straight on like that. I don't know why, so I can't speculate, but this is what he said in the video. You shouldn't throw it straight on like that. Maybe it's because he's thinking in terms of swings, but I mean, or maybe it's because he always demonstrates it like that with the big dead time follow through like that, in which case you can see why you might not want to do that. You might want to do it that way because the dead time is a little bit less dangerous than doing it straight on like that. And I would suggest that speaks to the genius of each one and the idea of hit and stop at the centre line. And So we say you move to the side, and that keeps you close range like that. So there's no sense of using compensatory power, which is a difficult one to do that way anyway, so that's fair enough. But also, very little sense of the idea that, well, actually this is about creating space and movement, and that people move, and that you might not be able to even maintain this. So it can't just be that you always do hooks like this, that you always practice them like step out, hook, step out, hook, like that, step out, hook. It just can't be, and that appears to be what he's teaching, that you teach it like that. And why I'm emphasising this is it's so opposite to the idea of an intuitive and infinite ability to hit no matter what the difficulty is, to be able to form a configuration, and that there are infinite possible varieties of configurations, rather than you always do this 1, 2, and you always step out for a hook, always step out for a hook like that, so that you can get the right angle on the arm. That's just one fixed way of doing it, and it doesn't match the reality of the context of the fight, obviously. I mean, I'm not saying that he doesn't know that, I'm just saying that that's the way he's teaching it, so I don't understand that. People move. What happens if they move over here and you've got to change, or they move further back over, you've got to change? What happens if they just move further back and you're going to throw the hook? You're still just going to go, no, I've got to keep getting to the side, like, I've got to keep getting to the side to get the hook in. Or are you just going to get a little bit of a longer range on it? And also, the other thing I think that's really important to emphasise is that in each one there's other ways of getting power in. There are other ways in human bodies, there's other ways of getting power in than just swinging or just doing a square. You can get the shoulder in to articulate more movement into a longer movement like that. It's the same thing we use for short power, but we can also use it for much longer range movements. Anyway, that's what we want to, that's what kind of thing we want to think about. So we want to think about, and the other reason for talking about it is like so many people in each one thinking like that it's short range, it's a short range system, so it starts trapping you in fixed techniques where you start thinking like, I've got to do that. Whereas we want to think about it instead now about how we stack postures differently, come at it from a different angle. Of course, we've got all the same ideas around use of footwork, and all those ideas are valid, but they're just, why would you just imprison yourself in just one way of doing it? That's not freedom. What we want is the freedom to change, the ability to intuitively adapt to situations that are, in which case that's just one variation out of an infinite possibility. And the question is, how do you start training like an infinity of possibilities? Well, that's what everyone does in every sport. They just train basics, and eventually, at a certain point, quantity transforms into an entirely different quality where you can intuitively adapt. It happens in literally every sport. But we want to start thinking about, first of all, take this principle that we have actually got an elbow joint, and that elbow joint can open out, so we can stack the posture differently, and we can also start articulating force differently into the posture. So we can even practice ourselves just getting a little like that. It's too fast for most people to see. So instead of just like the Yiquan and Xing Yiquan principle of like, this is just a spike, and it just pushes in like that. There's so many different ways of doing that in reality. Or you can just push in like that, or you can articulate the shoulder into it like that. And we want this articulated movement. It's part of our overall articulated force arsenal. The closer it is in like that, the more you can just do it like until it comes very close in, then you can't do it like that at all, and you've got to bring this back in like that, articulate it into short power like that. You can, but you lose the force, like that's nothing like that. You've got to articulate the shoulder, and what does it do? It creates a bigger movement, within the same small space. The same principle applies when we hit. If we're going to hit out like that, just getting a little bit of articulated movement into the posture. And what have we done then? We've taken exactly the same posture, and we've just stacked it differently. So The stacking is only a little bit different. It's just the arm is going out further, but there's more to a posture than just the way that it's stacked when it's finished. Stacking the posture is dynamic. Stacking the posture involves movement and different forms of articulated movement that we need to practice. Again, it's not that hard to get this. You practice it like mid-range, you practice it close range, you practice it long range, and it's slightly different the way you do it. The very close uses the articulation of the shoulder, very long uses the articulation of the shoulder like that. It gets more force in the movement, it creates a bigger movement like that. We get the far lee in that movement as well, creates more force, but they still all hit at the centre line, follow the same principles. They're just stacked differently if we think about them as static endpoints, but they're dynamically stacked differently as well. So this begins to open up a whole new world for us just based on what we've learned. So we're now really going into the infinite curriculum and using the multiplier effect in such a dynamic way that if we can get this, it will take us onto an entirely different level of understanding and an entirely different amount of stuff that we can learn. So let's change to basic jab like this, in kind of this way of doing a jab, and then let's start thinking about how we can change that stack, how we can stack it differently, and what's the dynamic stack for that, how is it dynamically stacked, and that can change depending on the punch or the technique. So one of the things we want to do straight away is just get this lean over like this. Lean over. And when you see, it's a very classic Yiquan way of moving for the old guys. And look, as I said, like, this is what this is. It's setting up this bigger movement, because this is a bigger movement like that. It's a bigger movement, you can get more force into it. We're always looking for how to get more force into the movement. We start with the basic, off the spot like that, because you don't always want to move your head over there, even if it's more powerful, bigger movement. We want to be able to intuitively adapt to whatever is necessary at the moment. The punch comes in or whatever, shift over, and that's generally speaking how we think about it. If you see that movement, you always think like, they're just avoiding a punch, they're just practicing avoiding a punch. It's like, yeah, but it's not just that. It's over-determined. Actually, it makes the posture bigger. Bigger posture, more power. And then all our other things come into play, all our screwing force, everything that we're doing in the body round, farley, round the vertical axis and so on. This is all adding power into the posture. It's the art of finding the most possible force whatsoever. The problem is that people fix themselves in fixed ways of doing it, that they only think in terms of, like I've been criticising, if you throw a hook, you've got to step to get to the angle and then hit the centre line from here and hit across like that, and that's a whole other thing, all the dead time of doing that. But thinking like, if I throw across, I've always got to be stepping like to the side like that to get the cross in. It becomes quite problematic when you want to get to the other side, I have to say, because then you've got to step like that to get the other side, and all of a sudden you've got to be ambidextrous, and that then opens up the door to why do we train being ambidextrous in each one? Because it helps make footwork concepts like this work. And I'm not saying the footwork concepts are wrong by any means, they're right, they're just like a tiny portion of what is right, obviously. So we don't want to start getting fixed into this, always doing it like that. And you do see people a lot in each one where they just always do that with the punch, like where they go over to the side like that. Certain very famous people I could name, but I won't, have this. Why are they doing it like that? Because it generates more force. But the argument is you should actually start from the pure template that's just off the spot like that, then start adding in variations. This is the fundamental, the foundation template stack. So all of these things that we've learned, the uppercuts, the overhands, these are all the template stacks, the perfect way that they should be, the posture should be performed like that. Then we start thinking of variations, and we don't need millions and millions of variations to practice. Variation 1, just getting over to the side like that. And it's otherwise exactly we just lose this lift up a little bit, I mean a lot. So we lose that and we change that into a smaller movement, and we use this extra space. So this movement here is lost, but it's not really lost, we're moving it. We're moving it into this. This movement here is that movement. It's just transformed into a different part of the body. So this quite abstract idea I've been trying to get across of moving where the space is. You know, don't do an elbow like that. Do it like that and change where the space is. So moving to the no mate, you just be out, shifting it over to the side like that. And this is what we call skewing the stack. We skew the stack in different ways, and the volume that's lost here is changed down here into this lean over, gets the power, shifts over like that. It's not always a like for like, you know, the power that you get from doing that isn't always the same as the power you get just from making it bigger by moving over like that. It's not always exactly the same, but we move it over. That's our basic. 1, like that, 2, and we can do the same the other way, like that, with the cross. Skew the stack over to the side like that. 1, 2, now we combine them, see? 1, 2, the multiplier effect. We can immediately know that we put these together. 1, and because I'm leaning all the way over here, 1, 2, the move over also is big, like that. So 1, 2, so we're using this to generate more force it's all about the generation of force. We're using our wave and screwing power and articulated movement. All of it is adding more volume in the space. It's all very straightforward when you start seeing it. The problem is some people are just trapped in, they always do it like that. They started with a skewed stack, and you shouldn't. You should start with the template stack. 1, 2. And you shouldn't be fixed in any template. So even if it's a posture like, you know, you want to do something like this, that might be the template, but you can change to, you know, if you want to do this kind of punch, you can change any posture like this and skew the way that it's stacked. And use that skew to generate more force. 1, 2, like that. And we can apply that to everything, but certain things change. So for example, if you want to do a hook, generally speaking, even the skewed stacks have infinite variety. So do we want to skew a hook close in, or do we want to skew the stack like that with a longer posture like that? So generally speaking, I would think like your template for the skewed stack is longer because you're moving further out of the way and you need to get a little bit of distance. So then you start bringing in the rotation around the shoulder like that. Getting in this articulated force like that. Then everything else comes into play in exactly the same way. At the hit point, that's your somatic timing that you change into the next thing, like that. The only thing that's really like knacky, and it makes a big difference with the backhand compared to the only thing that's like a more sophisticated skill to get, and it makes a big difference with the backhand, I think, more than the front hand, because the backhand is more powerful, is you don't necessarily want this whole movement. You just kind of want half of the, once it comes in here, circular, then the movement itself of opening up is the whole punch like that, is the whole swinging like that. Which is like, so Ramsey Dewey saying like, don't swing your punches. Like, well, if that's the right call, then it's the right call. This is how you generate power in these longer movements. That's why he's stuck doing it like that and has to rely on footwork, because he can't think like this, apparently. So one, you're not going to do, yeah, it is overall going to be like a whole, you can see it much more clearly when it's close range that it does a whole thing like that. You know, it does a whole into the But when you do longer range, and you do it rather than pulling your hand back into a big circle like that, you move this movement of the hand. It moves a bit, I have to say, but you move that movement into the shoulder, pulling back like that. But once you're going to do the second part of the circle, this second part of the circle here is contained in the big swing. So by the time the shoulders come in here, then it's the big swing, and then you release force around you screwing force into the punch like that. So that's a little bit knacky compared to short range, where you really feel the full articulation. The second half of the articulation is lost in the swing, and you've got to time it right to, it's like you do it to them and you just catch it, This is why you've got to have the correct consistency of overall muscle integration so that it feels like a whole system. You can see the way I'm moving like that. You can see me catch it, like once it's here we get the kind of slingshot movement, and then just the right amount of tension, just the right consistency from here, just slingshots the movement out like that. And we use the lean over then is very sympathetic to getting this kind of slingshot movement into it like that. When we do it from the back, that's much more pronounced feeling, and it's so much more pronounced that here we can say we do like a half round like that, then it goes into the big swing. Here we can say it's like a quarter, then it's already in the big swing for the back like that. You can hardly even see it like that. And that's very important in terms of speed, because when we go 1, 2 like that, this comes forward, and actually that movement is already there in that movement. It's articulated into this, and then here it catches and swings it into the... It's not quite a swing, and it's not quite a straight punch. So again, like this, like the way Ramsey Dewey is doing it, you can say that's square force, and we want a combination of square and circular force. So the idea that you shouldn't swing it at all, from the Yiquan perspective, that's wrong, because you want to unify square and circular force. And this is a very good example, it's still got this in it, which is from the square force. It's just evened out. It's the doctrine of the mean between square and circle, but in the movement itself, it's not just square like that. Which you can use it like that, just like you can use a swing if you have to. That's not a problem. But as our general template, here 1 and then swing, but it's not quite a swing. Once it's swing here, this just pushes in like a spike on the end of so it unifies the swing and the square, the circle and the square into this kind of unified movement. So, and again, we use just like in Nanchuan, where you do a big swing over like that, you can see it's exactly the same principle. It's a quintessence principle of Wushu, and the release of force on an angle like that, this is structurally integrated into the arm. It's not naturally like that. Only if you've got the right consistency of muscular and bodily integration linking the arm into the body, only the intent can do that. Then it slingshots it out like that. And there's just a little like that. The way you practice this, it's the same as anything, just practice first of all slow, the articulation of the shoulders like that, and practice the feeling in very small micro movements. But then you can get some of it just really easy just by practicing. Just pull the shoulder in a little bit, but a lot of it's linked to the consistency of the body, and is the consistency correct? So that's all about your standing and your slow movement practice. But when we go 1, 2 like that, it can start to really slow down the posture. It's inevitable in some ways, like if you go this way to the centre line, remember we talked about the idea, we've talked about it multiple times, complementary routing, and we somatic bounce from, and the closer we are, I'm doing it very square, 1, 2 like that, it's quite easy to do that. The bigger the movement, the harder it is to start getting that. And this is one of the reasons why you don't want a big a big like that, again, it's kind of a Nanchuan movement. You don't want a big circle on the arm like that. From here, you just want the lean forward like that. And here it is. This is where the articulation is. One, like that. A smaller movement. Otherwise, the body will be in. And it's nearly went over because the stack was so wrong. The body will be in, but the arm won't. So one, we're over here like, all the energy going that way. The body will be in, but the arm won't. Because if you waste time doing a big articulation of the shoulder like that, your body will already be around here. Your arm will be left back there, so it has to be smaller. And you can feel it anyway when you just practice nice and slow. You can feel the movement, 1, 2, like that. This is the absolute like circling meteors posture that you see all the time. The old timers in Yiquan do. Like that. Usually they are really old though, so you don't see them doing it at the full somatic speed, I have to say. The same the other way. One right over like that. And using the movement of the body to slingshot the power of the movement. What's it doing? It's not just a bigger movement, it's a bigger task specific movement. So one, I'm going to change this now. We talked before about the crooked axis, changing over like that. The axis is going through the body, up through the back of the head. One, and then farther around the axis, like that. Like that. Skewing the stack to either side like that. Now we can change the way that we skew it in multiple. There's really no limit, so we can practice multiple different ways of thinking about close range, further out, moving to the side, moving even more to the side, so quite an extreme down like that, and like that. Using a very similar, once you start skewing it and hitting long range, say for the lead one, you start using this kind of half circle, and then the swing out, such as it is a swing, is the other half of the circle. And that's pretty much the same no matter how much you go low like that or change it into an overhand. I'm not saying it's necessarily wise to do that, I'm just saying this is how you practice variations of stacks, variations on the template stack, of skewing the stack in different ways like that. So you can go, you can practice over, you could go lower, up, or you could drop down and up. So there's multiple different ways of making them more dynamic and adding more power in. And you can do it like this is what you see all the time. One, into a, I'm doing overhand there now. So one, step, skew, and skew changing to the hook, whatever length it is. You have an elbow joint no matter what anyone, well, probably said that, I recognise not everyone has. For those who have, change. So look, this is compensatory force. So just like in Yiquan, you use a step to compensate for the loss of power in the small movement. So is all footwork like this. And one, it helps you add power into the way that you're stacking the posture, particularly when you're skewing the stack. So you can go 1, 2, over like that and swing big punch like. And this is what you see when people start bringing it into Jiangwu, and you think they're just practicing moving out of the way. Actually what they're doing is making the posture bigger to add more power into the posture and using compensatory force with the footwork. And look at it going that way next. Once you have that principle, you don't need me to tell you how to practice. You know, you've got to get the feeling for it, but it's up to you to practice different angles. How low can you go? High, low, and practice it with steps. 1, 2, or 1, 2. However you want to practice it. It's up to you to practice that and break it down into different, it's embodied knowledge, it's unfolded knowledge. You just have to start practicing it. It's not downloaded into you. It doesn't arrive in you from doing standing or anything like that. Standing gives you the ability to use the fundamental body movement consistency skills to do this stuff. But let's say, for example, we want to go, so we've done that, and let's say, for example, I want to go this way, but I want to hit with this hand. So now, remember our key idea of postures being sympathetic, elements of postures being sympathetic to other techniques. This is not sympathetic to hitting this way, so we don't want to go like that. Necessarily, there's some postures like this in Shin Yiquan, so it's not, because it conforms to our principle of closing. So this is closing, so we can actually generate force through structural expansion or structural compression, and closing this way is a way of generating force like that with structural compression. So we can do that, no problem. It's just not that powerful, but it reverts back to the principle of, well, what's the hit point and what's the target? So if the hit point is bare knuckles and the target is right on the temple or the jaw or the cheek, you know, maybe not so much the jaw, but the cheek or the temple, that it might have more of an impact than, for example, if you hit them in the side of the arm or something like that. But what we do instead usually is exactly the thing that was being talked about in the Ramsey Chew video, is we use this, well, we're here, so we want to hit with this. So let's say we're going to do mid-range, so we do have a little bit of this, but it's this movement of the shoulder like that, this articulation of the shoulder joint, but it's pretty much just exists in the rising up of the shoulder joint like that, the lifting up, not like that, the lifting of the shoulder, and we don't want it depressed like that, pushed down like that, artificially put down like that. That's as bad as sticking it up like that. We want it in the middle. As it lifts up, that's pretty much that rotational movement into the punch, articulate power into the. So we use the from here, say, and then we just use this. It's more volume, it's more space. It's more space, we can do a bigger Farley around the axis, we can generate more force. What we don't want to do is start doing this kind of thing, which is what I was critiquing at first, where there's loads of dead time, and you're going to do a hook. You're going to do a hook that comes right past there, because the more power you put into a posture like that, the more you're going to show your back like that, and it's dead time. Look, you see it all the time in professional boxing, people doing that. It's not like we don't know that really great fighters do that and get away with it. But they're super duper tough, they're professional fighters. And even if they're training, they train best practice. They don't train to do that, you know. It's something that happens, of course. They don't train deliberately to do that. So they always train best practice, and that's what we should always think about. Even if we're just amateur hobbyists, that's really what we all are in each one. Not claiming to be anything else. We're amateur hobbyists, interested in the quintessence principles of wushu. We always try our best to be as professional as possible and train best practice, which is, as Yao Zongzun teaches us and tells us explicitly, drawn from Shaolin Chuan theory, hit and stop at the centre line. Not hit to the centre line and swing through with loads of dead time and show you back, but hit and stop at the centre line. So the more you swing through like that, the more your posture is based around swinging through like that, which is a way of generating power. Look what it is. It's more movement. It's bigger volume to the movement. This is all about, every martial art is doing this. Like, where is the volume of the movement? It's just that it's a quintessence principle of wushu to take that volume, that extra volume of movement from here, and to put it back in the overall movement of the body, to stop the posture here at the centre line, and to shift that extra movement into the articulate, for example, the articulation of the shoulders like that, into the screwing force in the arm. It's all distributed. All that extra movement is distributed into screwing force like that, and the articulation of the shoulder and the body, and the phased movement between shoulders, quad, and ankle that you can't see because the dog's there. was watching the video, you know, very closely, Ramsey Jew doesn't do anything like that. So I'm picking, if you don't know, I'm picking on him a bit because of the things he says about Chinese wushu one way or another, mostly about putting himself forward as a spokesperson for Chinese wushu and presenting completely wrong ideas around what Chinese wushu is and what Chinese wushu principles are. So it's very important to clearly explain what they actually are and that he doesn't do them. I'm not saying that what he does is wrong, you know, he's provenly effective, it's just that he doesn't represent Chinese wushu, and the principles that I'm talking about, these are the real thing. The things that he's talking about are not this. So we use the movement itself and then swing up like that. And that's fairly straightforward, and we've got loads of things where we change and do postures like that. We've talked about that kind of thing before. Question is, the other side, if I go this way but I want to hit with the other hand, the other arm like that, you can do the same thing like that, then you've got to use short power. Even if the posture is going to be long, you've got to use this articulation of the shoulder to pull back out and then in like that. What's it doing? It's creating more volume, it's creating more space around that. It's not, this is so much more sophisticated than this, like this magic power stuff, like we go like that. That's like, they're faking it. They're faking this. It's like a child's understanding of this. And Wang Xiangjai talks about that, like people seeing it and not understanding what is it, and then coming up with bullshit explanations. One over like that, so we can do it in two stages, like 1, 2, over in the posture like that. You see the very dynamic, such a powerful posture, you can really see the dynamic somatic bounce. And it hits at the centre line and bounce like that. And that, in the old days, you'd have seen that much more pronounced. They really go with it like that. That's an addition onto the actual somatic bounce itself. When it's controlled, it's just that big. To do it like that, you have to add that extra little bit on. And they did that deliberately. Like, why did they do it deliberately? You know, it's this kind of movement, it's making the movement bigger, not that movement, but the next movement. So going like from here, like that, and making the movement bigger, using the somatic bounce, big somatic bounce, deliberately pulling the, actually what it does is it uses the somatic bounce itself, and then you change that seamlessly into a pullback to make the posture bigger into the next posture like that. And one of the things that Yao Zhongzong particularly, and then the Yao brothers particularly started looking at, it's not the only one I have to say, some very good, some really, really good early students of Yao Zhongzong do this as well. I'll talk about them another time. Making it smaller, just using the somatic bounce itself, not putting the artificial pullback on it, and just going into the next movement. Again, changing this extra movement here and putting it back in the body along with everything else, following the quintessence principles of wushu. So even as Yiquan's developing, this idea is condensing movement, more volume into a small space. So for example, we could go like that, rather than, for example, this very artificial pullback from the somatic bounce. Just go straight into the next like that, and we'll put from here, tiny pullback, we'll put this extra movement into the body. We'll shift it from here into the body. See what I'm saying? It's straightforward. It's not straightforward to do by any means, but the concept is straightforward. And once you start seeing this, everything makes sense. The whole thing just starts making sense about the way each one movement is structured. Everything else starts making sense as well. What's this when people in Backwire are training like this kind of movement? It's articulated force, they're creating more volume out of a small space. What's this in Tai Chi Chuan when they're doing this? Creating more volume through articulated force and so on. Each one reveals all mysteries. But we can also use the posture itself like that to change into the, don't necessarily going to do a hook like that. Overhand is more common. You see this all the time in all kinds of pro fighting. Use the Well, what's different for us is now we start thinking beyond our paradigm. Remember when I started, not beyond the structural movement Yiquan paradigm, but what we've learned so far, we start thinking beyond. We looked at Farley round the axis and round the quad like that. Remember I mentioned like we can start getting some very dynamic combinations of these two movements. One of which is like to release force very strongly on a skewed axis like that. And then we just use the same principle of our bodily consistency, just hooks this posture onto the end like that, so it becomes one, and it just sets into a hole at the last, and we just use the whole thing to, this is generating force. Once you see that, it's like, I think people aren't just moving out of the way and throwing punches. This is whole body interconnectivity, the whole thing is connected together. The whole thing is creating more volume. The whole thing is adding more into the Farley equation. So stop thinking about Farley as a magical thing. Stop thinking about it as if it's nothing. Farley, or it's everything, any kind of movement, it's not. Farley is a specific kind of short, sharp movement. And remember, we say short, not in terms of how far the hip point is from the body, short in terms of this kind of movement in the body itself. So it starts getting a little bit bigger now. The axis itself twists and bends, and we add in the a little bit of that into the, like that, to add into power like that. We're skewing the stack, and once you get that, you can start adding in different variations. So I want to go one, and exactly the same I want to hit with this hand. One, I've got to pull it back, I've got to use this articulation of the shoulder, like that. You can do it like, even if you put your hand on the wall, you can articulate like that. And that's how you, for example, if you put your hands on the bag and push it, that's not the same as like when you push like that from when there's a gap between your hands and the bag. You put your hands on the bag and you articulate like that. And you change the build-up movement. Your hands don't leave the bag. You change the build-up movement like that into the push like that. And that's how you do the push from your hands on. It's the articulated movement creating more volume. This video will be doing it on a heavy bag anyway. So, I mean, that's quite a lot of stuff, isn't it? So we just want to introduce this idea now that you yourself start going away and thinking about, well, I'll take all my basic movements like a jab, and I'll start thinking about, well, what if I skew the stack down like that, and I want to hit close? Well, how do I use articulated power and short power like that? What if I want to do it longer like that? What's the difference? Not that much difference for a jab, but for a hook, loads of difference if you start thinking about differences between speed and power. If it's very, very close, I could just do it like a little dink like that, or I can get the articulated shouldering like that. Doesn't actually make that much difference in terms of speed, but it makes a big difference in terms of power. If I want to get it longer range like that, I don't really just want to dink it in like that. I want to get the articulation of the shoulder into the posture. So it's not just about the way the posture is skewed, the way the configuration is stacked. It's stacking as a dynamic enterprise. What's the dynamic stack? The dynamic of the stack. 1, 2. How do I? And then if it's close range, I don't really need this articulation of the shoulder. It's going to be plenty powerful enough just to use a square structure like that and just rely on the release of force. It'll be a little bit too slow and unnecessary to do that. Can do that, but there's different ways that you can choose to stack the posture. And then you just change that to everything. Like, so thinking about uppercuts. Why is an uppercut close range? Why is a hook close range? It's not. Why would it be? If you've got an elbow joint, if you've got elbows, if you've got arms, you've got an elbow joint. So one can be close range and it can be stacked differently in different ways like this. And you can change then and just start thinking about how do you start moving with postures and stacking them differently like this. Once you start being able to do that, You're doing what you're seeing the older Yiquan masters do when they're doing this. They're just skewing the stack and articulating the dynamic of the stack in different ways for different movements. If anything, I'd say people worship the past. Actually, we're more advanced now. That's the honest truth. You can see from the movement, we're actually more advanced now, and because we stand on the shoulders of giants. They've had to spend years learning that stuff. We can just be taught it in a relatively short space of time. What you can't rush is the development of bodily consistency through standing and slow movement. That's the thing that takes the time. The actual postural requirements are quite easy. Once they've been worked out for us, we can learn them really, really quickly. That's why nowadays, like the level is higher for that, like it is in everything, every sport, and so it should be. Don't worship the past. Every generation should be better. Wang Xianzhai told us that. It's just that not every part of this generation is better, is it, Tresh? No, it's not. Some of it is significantly worse. It's only a limited amount we can do about that. Okay, that introduces the concept. Doesn't show you how to do it. Can't be downloaded into you by me or by a teacher or a lineage or anyone. That teaches you the concept. You've got to unfold it. It's experiential, embodied knowledge. You've got to work on it. And what teaches you this? This kind of slow, structural play. Don't even think in terms of Jianwu. That's a bit more free flow for your spirit. Think in terms of structural play, just playing with the combinations and thinking about these. The doctrine of the mean between square force and circular force. Don't buy into this. It should always be square force. You should never do a swing like that. That's meaningless. Who's to say you should never do anything? If it's the right call, it's the right call. You name it, you can find someone who's knocked someone out doing it somewhere, you know. But specifically in each one, we want to find these doctrines of the mean between square and circular force. And different postures that are stacked in different ways will have different degrees of square and circular force. It's a ratio, not a fixed dogma. A ratio that allows you to dynamically articulate the stack as you skew it in different ways from the template stack. So I think I've rehashed all the key points I wanted to get across. That's it from him. That's it from me. Seemed like a big waffle, but hopefully the key ideas have been got across so that we can move forward and look at other stuff based around that. Keep up, learn fast. I haven't got enough time left on this earth to go in all the detail I want to do. One love. Take it easy. Spread the word. Leave a message. Okay.